What if a single tennis match could make an entire stadium change its plans? Not the schedule, not the seating chart, but the whole idea of what a stadium is even for. And what if that match hasn't even happened yet? Because right now, in New York, tournament officials are staring at ticket numbers they cannot fully explain, and one name keeps showing up at the center of it. So before we go any further, you need to know this isn't a story about a tennis player winning matches. It's a story about something far stranger, something almost impossible to plan for. And it starts with a question nobody in professional tennis expected to be asking this summer. What happens when one 21-year-old walks onto a court and the building itself seems to lean toward her? Her name is Alex. Remember that name, because by the end of this, you'll understand why tournament directors are saying it like it's a warning and a promise at the same time. Let's go back, because to understand what's happening in New York right now, you have to understand what happened before anyone was paying attention. Early this year, Alex was talented, sure. Everyone in tennis circles knew that. But talented isn't the same as unstoppable, and talented definitely isn't the same as an economic event. She was a name people were watching, not a name people were chasing. And then Wimbledon happened. Picture it. The most historic court in tennis. The defending champion standing across the net, Iga Swiatek, a player who had already conquered that stage before. And somehow, against all the weight of that reputation, Alex won. 4th round. A result that should have been the headline for weeks. But here's the thing about this story. That wasn't even the moment everything changed. That was just the first crack in the wall. Because a few weeks later, something happened in Washington that nobody in tennis was prepared for. Not the fans, not the broadcasters, not even, it seems, the tournament itself. Alex walked into the Wimbledon DC Open and did something no Filipina had ever done in the history of the sport. She reached the final, and across the net stood Jessica Pegula, the top seed, the favorite, the player everyone expected to win. Alex lost the first set, 6-4. If you'd stopped watching right there, you'd have assumed you knew how this story ends. But she didn't stop. She won the second set. Then she did something almost cruel to her opponent's momentum. She won the third set 6-love. A complete collapse of the script everyone thought they were watching. Her first WTA singles title, the first ever for a Filipina, and almost instantly, her ranking shot to world number 20, a number that used to feel impossible for Philippine tennis, now suddenly real. But that's not actually the part of the Washington story you need to remember most. Here's the part that should give you chills. The tournament owner later said that at least 80% of every ticket inquiry his staff received was about one single question. When is Alex playing? Not who's in the draw. Not what time do gates open. One name. Over and over, people weren't buying tickets to watch tennis. They were buying tickets to watch her. And if you think that was a one-time spike, a fluke, a moment of local excitement that would fade the second she left town, wait until you hear what happened in Toronto. Because Toronto is where this stopped being a story about a talented young player and became something tournament directors don't have a name for yet. The plan was simple. Put Alex on the grandstand court. Reasonable size, around 2,800 seats. A court built for a rising player, not yet a superstar. Except the tournament director, a man named Carl Hale, looked at the numbers coming in and realized they had a problem. Not a small problem. A structural one. He estimated that Alex had probably sold upward of 5,000 tickets for a court that only holds 5,600 less than that. Read that again. The demand for one player nearly outgrew the physical capacity of the court she was assigned to. Do you understand how rare that is? Tournaments build their entire scheduling logic around rankings, opponents, television slots, sponsor obligations. 100 moving pieces designed by people who've done this for decades. And suddenly there was a new variable nobody had fully priced in. A fan base that didn't just watch. A fan base that traveled. A fan base that organized its life around one player's court time. And here's where the story takes its first real turn. Because you'd think all of this winning meant Alex had become unbeatable. That she was floating on some unstoppable wave through the summer. She wasn't. In Cincinnati, she ran into Amanda Anisimova, and the match went the way tennis matches sometimes go when the story isn't ready to be simple. Alex lost the first set, won the second, and in the third, Anisimova closed it out, 6-2, 2 hours and 28 minutes of tennis, and at the end of it, Alex walked off a loser. And you might think that's where the momentum stalls. That's where the excitement fades. That's where tournament directors quietly stop worrying about court capacity. But it isn't. Because here's what almost nobody talks about when they talk about sports fandom. The magic was never about certainty. Nobody was buying tickets because they knew Alex would win. They were buying tickets because they didn't know. Because somewhere between a first-round match and a life-changing upset, there's a feeling that only live sport can give you. And Alex, whether she wins or loses, has become one of the players capable of producing that feeling on command. And that brings us to New York, to the US Open, to the biggest stage in the sport, in one of the loudest, most unforgiving cities on earth. Let's set the scene properly, because you need to feel the scale of what's about to happen. The 2026 US Open's main draw begins August 30th. Fan Week already started days earlier, on August 23rd at Flushing Meadows, where thousands of people are wandering the grounds before the real tournament has even begun. Carlos Alcaraz is back, chasing more history. Jannik Sinner has withdrawn, leaving a gap at the top of the men's draw that everyone is still talking about. Serena Williams is part of an enormous mixed doubles storyline that's already dominating headlines. This is not a quiet tournament. This is one of the loudest sporting events on the planet, in a year already loaded with storylines. And into that chaos walks a 21-year-old who, 4 years earlier, in that exact city, on those exact courts, won the US Open Junior Girls title. Sit with that for a second. In 2022, Alex was a teenager celebrating a junior championship. A meaningful moment, sure, but a small one in the grand scheme of professional tennis. Now she returns not as a promising junior, but as a top 20 professional, a WTA title holder, a player who has already beaten a Wimbledon champion and nearly detonated a tournament's entire court scheduling plan in Canada. That's not a comeback story. That's a completely different chapter of a story most people are only just discovering exists. And before her singles campaign even begins, she's already inside the tournament's spotlight. Entered in the newly revamped mixed doubles event alongside Felix Auger-Aliassime, and listed among the players in the Stars of the Open exhibition program, which means fans don't have to wait for the main draw to see her. She's already part of the conversation happening on the grounds right now, this week, before the tennis world has even settled into its usual rhythm. So let's talk about the tickets, because this is where you need to slow down and separate fact from noise. Is the entire US Open sold out because of one player? No, that would be an exaggeration, and this story doesn't need exaggeration to be extraordinary. Official listings still show tickets available across multiple sessions. But, and here's the part that should catch your attention, Reuters reported that resale prices for this tournament are running high, with first-round get-in prices around $197, over 30% higher than the same point last year. The average price across all 60 sessions sits near $283. Finals tickets are averaging over $500. Now, is all of that about one player? Of course not. Alcaraz is part of it. The absence of Sinner shifts things. The new mixed doubles format is pulling in crowds nobody expected. But somewhere inside that massive, complicated, multi-layered ticket economy, there's a smaller, sharper pattern. Pockets of demand that seem to appear specifically around one name. The same way they appeared in Washington, the same way they nearly broke a court in Toronto. And that's the real question hiding underneath all of this. Not, did Alex sell out the US Open? But can one player create a surge of demand large enough to matter inside a tournament this massive, this saturated with stars? Because if the answer is yes, and Toronto already answered that question once, then what happens when that same phenomenon lands in the most watched tennis market on the planet? Let's talk about why this is happening. Because it's not just about winning. If it were only about winning, plenty of ranked players would generate this kind of reaction. And they don't. This is about something deeper, something that lives outside the scoreboard. For millions of Filipino fans, Alex isn't simply another athlete climbing a ranking list. She represents something that has almost never existed before. A genuine, sustained presence at the top of world tennis from a country that historically has not had one. Not compared to the traditional powerhouses. Not compared to the countries that produce champions decade after decade. When Alex walks onto a court, flags appear, not one or two, sections of them. When she wins, the celebration doesn't stay inside the tennis world. It spills into group chats, into living rooms, into communities that don't normally follow tennis at all. And when she plays in major cities abroad, something else happens. Filipino communities living far from home suddenly have a reason to show up together, in person, as one unit. That's what people mean when they talk about the Filipino Army surrounding her matches. It's not a cute nickname invented for social media. It's a description of an actual pattern. Individual tennis matches turning into community gatherings, into small pilgrimages, into shared national moments happening thousands of miles from where she was born. Now picture a stadium before she walks out. Ordinary murmur. Some fans there for the tennis itself, some waiting for a bigger match later in the day. Half attention scattered across a dozen different storylines. Then Alex appears, and the section holding the flag stands first. Then the section beside it. Then a chant starts low, then louder. And suddenly, people who wandered in without a strong opinion are leaning forward, phones up, paying attention to a match they weren't planning on watching 30 seconds earlier. That shift, that exact shift, is what tournament directors are trying to plan around right now in real time, with limited data and a fan base that keeps proving bigger than expected. And here's where the tension really builds. Because none of this, not Toronto, not Washington, not the Nike shirt that reportedly sold out almost immediately after release, none of it guarantees anything about what happens next. The draw is still unfolding. The matches haven't been played yet. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the next stretch of this story so dangerous, in the best possible way. Because ticket demand for tennis isn't static, it moves. It shifts the moment a draw is released. The moment fans know exactly who's playing whom and when. A first-round match is a guess. A second-round match starts to feel like an appointment. A third-round match becomes an event people rearrange their week around. And if Alex wins her way into the second week of a Grand Slam, something changes that goes beyond ticket sales entirely. Because at that point, fans aren't buying seats to watch a promising rising player anymore. They're buying seats to witness a possible historic breakthrough, live in real time, with everything on the line. That distinction is enormous. That's the difference between a good story and a story people remember for years. And she has already shown, more than once this summer, that she can handle exactly that kind of pressure. Not always winning, Cincinnati proved that. But never shrinking from the moment either. So here's where we are. A player who entered 2026 as promising but not yet dominant. A player who beat a Wimbledon champion. A player who authored the biggest comeback of her career against a top seed in Washington to win her first title. A player whose fans nearly overwhelmed a court in Toronto. A player whose merchandise vanished within hours of release. A player who lost painfully in Cincinnati. A reminder that none of this is guaranteed, that the story could end quietly at any moment. And now, a player standing at the edge of the US Open, in the same city where she once celebrated a junior title as a teenager, except now everything about the stakes, the scale, and the attention has multiplied beyond recognition. The tickets are not sold out. Let's be honest about that. But the pattern is unmistakable. And patterns like this tend to accelerate, not fade, especially on the biggest stage in the sport. If Alex wins her opening match, watch what happens to demand for her next one. If she wins that one too, watch how fast this conversation moves from rising star to something much bigger, much louder, much harder for anyone in tennis to ignore. Because tournaments don't just want great players. Every Grand Slam has great players. What tournaments actually want, what they can't manufacture no matter how much money they spend, is a reason for people to show up. A reason to travel. A reason to buy the shirt before it sells out. A reason to bring the flag. A reason to refresh the schedule obsessively, waiting for one line to appear, the time and court for a single match. And right now, in New York, that reason has a name. So when you hear people say the US Open ticket market is red hot this year, remember, it's not one simple story. It's Alcaraz chasing more history. It's the drama of Sinner's absence. It's Serena's presence around mixed doubles. It's a tournament that expanded Fan Week and reshaped its own format to create more spectacle. But somewhere inside all of that noise, there's a quieter, sharper signal. A 21-year-old who has, in the space of a single summer, gone from promising talent to a name tournament directors say like it changes their planning. And if she starts winning in New York, if the crowds keep building the way they built in Washington and nearly overflowed in Toronto, then this story stops being about tickets entirely. It becomes about whether one player, from one country that tennis has historically overlooked, can turn every stadium she enters into something the sport has never quite seen before. Not just a match, but an occasion. The draw is set. The matches are coming. And somewhere between now and the second week of this tournament, we're going to find out exactly how far this can go. Because the tickets were never really the story. They were only ever the evidence. The real story is what happens the moment Alex starts winning in front of everyone who came just to see her do it.